Thank you a lot for coming and resisting the temptation to have a great nap after a great lunch. So today we will speak about mobile web, about its peculiarities, its pitfalls, and how to deal with it, how to work with it in terms of strategy. First of all, let me tell a few words about Thomas Cook I work for at the moment and myself, my role within the company. Thomas Cook is a global travel provider who nowadays serves 19 million customers a year. And this is a company, a successor company of the first travel company in the world. It was Thomas Cook and Son. It was founded by Thomas Cook, who actually invented tourism as we know it now, with packages of accommodation, transportation, food, and entertainment. It's fun that Thomas Cook's idea was to provide an alternative to alcohol, to having fun this way. And the first stories were actually temperance proponents whose first entertainment was a temperance meeting. So they came in open carriages, like in the picture to the left of you, and they were carried 12 miles at that point. Nowadays, the number of entertainment options within Thomas Cook is much greater, actually. I am quite a modest part of the Thomas Cook organization. Nowadays, it's more than 20,000 people, and I had 30 QAs in one web department where we work on the product for our customers to be able to buy their tour packages in a few clicks. By the way, have any of you ever used Thomas Cook for organizing your holidays? Oh, you used it, cool. Hope you enjoyed. So let's start. What's there in mobile web, and what is the specificity of mobile web in the mobile world? As you know, there are several types of applications, native, hybrid, web applications, and usually web is considered to be the most vanilla one, because native apps imply that you interact with the device itself, and hybrid also implied to some extent. And in web, you know, it's a lot on server side, which is quite independent on the platform in the end, and it's the browser who handles this communication with your device. So there are opinions that web is quite simple and it doesn't require very special attention. It's enough to just have some basic UI checks on small resolutions, because small resolutions may provide them. But is it really so? Let me tell a few words about the concept of WAPPLIFICATION. Actually, it's like web application. Nowadays, web applications become more and more native-like. They are smoother in their experience. There are single-page applications which remove page loads on each navigation action. There are progressive web applications which use offline-first approach and actually suggest you a lot of functionality, such as server push notifications and even background syncing after your network comes back. So there are such aspects as performance, client-side performance particularly, and even working with your mobile device resources can sometimes be a problem for your web application, which can work with no network and then sync when this network is back. So testing in different network conditions becomes crucial for web applications. What is also important for web is the dependencies on the design approach. Usually we're talking about two opposite design approaches, one being the responsive web design, where there is one template which is loaded to any of your device, and then it's on client side where it's actually decided what to display, how to display. There are media queries, there are fluid grids to deal with it, but in general, when we see that all the resources are loaded every time, we need to think that probably performance and again different network conditions may be a problem, because all the resources may be quite a lot. At the same time, adaptive web design, which implies that with love and care, a template per each resolution for different form factors is prepared. There is a server-based solution where it's server which decides what to send to the client. And again, it's a different set of resources which allow it, a different template, and it may represent its own problems. What else should be considered when we talk about mobile web is different problems with network provider settings. I myself experienced a case when we as a department, we tested an application thoroughly. It was checked on different network providers. It was checked on Wi-Fi. It was checked on the mobile internet. And then when it came to the real usage, people didn't get the content of our application. And it turned out that there were some specific proxy settings which were used by the mobile internet provider of this specific country. We didn't test because it was not our country. It actually was a problem for us because our users didn't like us. They didn't care about whose problem it were. There are also firewall settings which can block your application. So proxy can block not only websites themselves, both proxy and firewalls can block specific content. It should be taken into account. And one more example from my past actually was related to viewport height settings. There was a case when a web application was supposed to take the full screen with no scroll bar, with orientation lock, so it was just implied to be full size. And we had real problems on the devices with soft keys because at least at that point of time, these soft keys were not taken into account when the mobile device built this viewport height. So the soft keys of the device itself, they blocked our most important controls, which were also supposed to be there at the bottom. I would also say that when it comes to browsers, you need to remember that they are quite complicated creatures with different levels. So it's a rendering engine which differs between different browsers. It's also JavaScript engine. And now when our clients get fatter, client side of web application becomes more and more complicated, it's necessary to understand that different browsers will treat it really differently. And there are also tips and tricks regarding browsers. For example, you should take into account that Chrome for your desktop and Chrome for iOS they use different layout engines. And also, when it comes to some specific features like server-sent events or push APIs, they may be implemented very differently on different browsers. So when you build your test strategy, you need to build these equivalence partitions for your browsers, taking into account very, very different aspects. For example, push API, which allows you to send some events from server to the client without client requesting it. In some browsers, it is implemented the way when you can send this event even if the browser is actually not activated. And for another browsers, it can only be sent if the browser is activated. Now we finally come to our main topic, being our real devices, emulators and simulators. So where to test mobile web? First of all, let's discuss the options we actually have. We have real devices. That's clear even from the topic of the speech. They are emulators and simulators. Emulators and simulators are both similar and very different in some ways. So both emulators and simulators are devices which are not real, but they pretend to be real. But emulators pretend much better because they actually try to build the whole environment on the host environment, while simulators only try to mimic the software part. So when you start thinking about what may be relevant for your web application, it's better to know this difference because it will be quite crucial in some of the cases. When we try to answer the question where you should test your particular application, I would say that the simplest answer, which is correct, would be just try different options, create the difference between your real options and your not real options, and understand how critical it is in terms of your application and its quality risks. It will be the best option. But at the same time, there are some considerations to be taken into account when you decide. And I would say that it's worth mentioning two major criteria, which are the complexity, the weight of your client side. Either it's a small, not very complicated UI application, or it's a real program with JavaScript, which interacts with your client and creates real business logic. And also browsers you need to support. In my experience, I haven't specified them quite explicitly here. In my experience, latest Android with Chrome and latest iOS with Safari, they are quite painless. So it's good if you have very simple application. They are quite good to work with simulators. Simulators, it's easy. And maybe, based on your risks, you don't even need real devices in such a case. At the same time, when it comes to modern web applications, which became more and more applications, and if it comes to some specific browsers you need to support, it gets worse, and probably you need to think more about real devices and really carefully check the options which suggest not a really real experience. What's next? One more topic, which is usually a reason when you talk about emulators, simulators, real devices, is where to use what. Because they have different costs, they have different speed, they are actually quite different and maybe good for some needs and bad for other needs. I myself would suggest you to base your decisions on the known bug cost graph diagram. As you know, the further in your development life cycle you find the problem, the worse, because it's more expensive to fix. So it's important to find bugs early, and this is why I suggest the following. Dev testing and some basic smoke testing is good to be done on simulators and real devices. Simulators are good here because they provide very fast feedback loop. They are regularly very fast. If you have ever used Chrome device mode, you know that it's a question of several seconds to check different options on them. And real devices, I put them here because I do believe that for your top priorities, you usually have some top priority devices. It's better to find problems really early. So if you know there are potential impact, potential risks, it's better to include real devices early, because if you find problems on your top priority devices too late, well, bad for you, because they will be expensive and they will need to be fixed, because top priority devices are usually treated with top priority attention. Then story acceptance and regression testing. Real devices also, I suggest to use some very limited number for your top priority models and platforms, operation system, browser. And emulators, as it was already mentioned several times, they are quite good for several reasons. They provide quite good results because they tend to emulate the whole device and not some layer of it. And they are just cheaper than real devices. So when it comes to automation and test parallelization, it's good if you can use emulators. They are quite helpful in most of the cases. And also simulators, they can help you with UI checks I mentioned at the very beginning. Really, it may be very easy and fast. When it comes to production testing, I would say it really depends on the goal. If we talk about some post-release, post-deployment checks, I would say they may be done on real devices. If we talk about some, for example, there is a practice of regular customer end-to-end journeys, it's good to include emulators. It will be, again, cheaper and quite effective for you. Another question which may raise in your head, is do you need physical devices or do you need them to be virtual ones? No recipe, no silver bullet here, but some pretty obvious questions I would suggest to ask yourself. Number of devices you need. Actually, the bigger number you have, the more complicated it is to support them in physical world. For me, my greatest number was actually 80, as far as I remember, and it was quite hard. Starting from the moment people always forgot to charge them, and you had this waste time every time you found this device. Then there were wastes because people didn't know who uses the device, and we had to suggest some workarounds and solutions like Confluence page with current owner, which was always forgotten to be updated. And it's the second part of my checklist, question checklist. It's how big is your team? The bigger the team is, the worse for you to handle this all in the physical world. As well as actually locations you have. If you have distributed locations, you probably should think about virtual option or both, because there is no third hidden option here, both physical and virtual. Sometimes it's good to have some physical devices. They are pretty good from UX, usability testing perspective, and then have some other devices just in virtual world. It will be easier for you to manage. And how often do you actually run your tests? The more often you execute tests, the faster your devices get out of order. That's true, and when I say they get out of order, this really may be very out of order. A few words about what we are doing in OneWeb with our particular web application. It's a single-page web application with responsive design. Its backend is partly Java, partly Node.js. Its frontend is AngularJS. And we are doing the following. We have a set of physical real devices where we run acceptance testing of news story, and also we have a practice of exploratory testing before release. It's some end-to-end tests where a team gathers and shares experience about the product. The product is quite big, so we actually divide it into several parts, and sometimes people get a bit silo mentality working with these small parts. So exploratory testing is one of the activities which helps to widen your horizons. Then we have source labs, Android emulators, and iOS simulators for all of our automation activities. At the moment, for automation, we have only emulators and simulators, no real devices. And also, we actively use Chrome device mode because it's fast and pretty cool. It provides very short feedback loop. Our developers tend to use it before actually letting their changes to go further to our environment. And also we use it for checking small resolutions. How is our automation organized? We use Source Labs, as I mentioned, and we use Source Connect for VPN secured connection between us. We cannot afford non-secure connection, so we have this VPN setup. We have 50 VMs on Source Labs, and usually we run them in, how to say it properly, it's written pretty well there. It's 2 parallel suits, and each suit has 25 parallel threads. Usually it's so. Currently, our regression takes 6 hours. Full regression, we have several markets, several brands, and these 6 hours include both markets, brands, and different devices. Below, you can see different tools we use within our framework. It's written with JavaScript, uses WebDriver, Protractor as a solution for end-to-end testing of Angular applications, Cucumber for BDD, and Allure for reporting. Some statistics we have currently for our automation. Numbers of tests and their average duration per one test. As you can see, as it's usually expected, the fastest are desktop browsers, and mobile and tablet are not that fast. Oh, by the way, desktop browsers, we also use Sauce Labs for desktop browsers, not only mobile we mentioned today. What is in progress right now? Right now, we are looking at real device cloud. We are running POCs. We have a list of tools to compare. We are doing it on the level of the whole company, so it's a very profound, comprehensive approach with POC goals. Our main priorities are actually performance, the speed of our interaction with the devices, security, we need VPN connectivity, it's our must. Stability, reliability, good set of devices, and ideally it's user management we look at, because 30 people, it's only QAs, and we have only also developers in our teams, so it's just quite hard to allocate them properly and manage this allocation properly. We are also working on improving our hourglass anti-pattern, not improving, but overcoming, I would say, to finally go to the proper test level distributions. It's a good practice, one of the best practices for real optimization of your automation. So we just want our end-to-end tests to be smaller in their number. And we have already some progress within half a year. API tests are faster. They have very small feedback loop for you, and usually they just help you to debug faster, because you don't need to check if your UI level has something to do with your bug. You already know that it's somewhere in particular area of your application. What I would say in the end, I think mobile web is like life. Because some people consider it to be simple, and sometimes it's really simple. Also, it's rare black and white. There are always some peculiarities to be taken into account. And it's also worth thinking a lot before making any decisions. Thank you very much. Time for your questions.